R like R. Dot Harrison.
R. Dot Harrison Miller. It's probably like wrong.
Yeah, when they wrote
Equal phony. Yeah. So, like, I have for us marked down the windows in the garage, the fight with Stradler, and I think like Maurice was getting mentioned right as we were coming to an end. So far as violent thoughts with him. I'm guessing when we said Maurice, we were probably looking at when Maurice gets in the fight with him after he calls him a dirty moron.
I wouldn't call that a fight. I just call it a big
Well,
shit.
a physical altercation that's fairly one-sided. I would go with that. I would say that you do have, though, after the fight, you do have not so much violent actions, but at least somewhat violent thoughts with Maurice so far as Holden. He has his whole little daydream. Although Holden in his 1949, 1950 slang doesn't say shoot Maurice, but he's going to
Pop, or was it?
not pop. You write letter.
Fill him full of lead.
Pump.
Plug him.
Hey, let him
And he's having this whole vision of him wearing like the fedora, the overcoat, having the gangster machine gun, and who's going to be there with him?
Sonny.
No,
Jane.
Jane's going to be there with him. So the heroic female character who we don't apparently ever meet so far within the story, but he thinks about it quite a lot, is going to be there with him. So there's that little bit of a vengeance idea that kind of takes place. After the fight with Maurice, and he kind of like slides back into the bathroom, he takes a look at the window.
Check the Herbert's again.
No.
And wants to kill himself.
Oh.
I don't know if I'd say he wants to, but what
He realizes he can.
Contemplates.
Wants to.
there's a little bit of contemplation with the window, with him jumping out. Decides he doesn't want to, because what doesn't he want to have happen?
He doesn't want people looking at his dead body.
He doesn't want
If
the
he,
morons.
he would jump out the window and someone would immediately come around.
He doesn't want there to be a scene where all the rubberneckers are going to kind of be coming around with it.
It's a wrong.
Someone who's supposed to like see what's.
When there's an accident on the parkway, people who stop and do this, they call them rubberneckers for looking at the accident. Anything else starting covering violence? See if we have anything else. Since I'm pausing long enough, you can probably tell it might be a little bit more.
Yeah, just like violent. I wouldn't say violent. Never mind.
All right, go. Keep going.
I would say like he has like weird thoughts, like I don't know, always.
What do you mean by weird?
That was too broad. That was
Yeah, it was.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not ready.
I'm not ready.
That's good.
Who does he like in the Bible?
Judas. Oh.
Because he wasn't a phony. That's a weird. He doesn't like Jesus. He says Jesus. Oh, he likes
he likes Jesus.
He doesn't like the disciples.
He does not like the disciples.
Yeah, that's right.
Because just like sucking up to him,
Yeah, bunch of phony.
and like they weren't qualified to decide.
I don't know why he likes.
They were
Judas.
randomly.
Why?
Wait,
He doesn't. I don't think he.
I like almost anybody in the Bible better than the disciples. I'm going to skip down a little bit. But I could not ever see eye to eye. This is him having a conversation with Arthur Childs. I could not see him eye to eye on a lot of stuff in the Bible, especially the disciples. He kept telling me if I didn't like the disciples, then I didn't like Jesus at all. And he said that because Jesus picked the disciples, you were supposed to like them. I said I knew he picked them, but that he picked them at random. I said he didn't have time to go around analyzing everybody. I said I wasn't blaming Jesus or anything. It wasn't his fault that he didn't have any time. And keeps going on and on about the disciples and how crafty he thinks they are. Do you remember, this is on page 99, I like Jesus, and then he says, if you want to know the truth, because of course that's what he has to say, which is somewhat ironic. Who else does he like? Says, I like them 10 times more than
Some
the disciples.
other biblical character. I don't know who that is.
The guy I like best in the Bible, next to Jesus, was that lunatic and all that lived in the tombs and kept cutting himself with stones. I like him 10 times as much as the disciples. That poor word. And then used to get into arguments and whatnot with it. Anyone know who he's talking about?
I forget. I definitely know the story. Yeah. I remember all the people. It was on page 99, you said?
Yep, page 99.
Like, there were a bunch.
Not low versus
About
Bible.
2/3 of the way down. And so with the lunatic, with stones and whatnot, there is, as far as I think Kay was talking about, maybe there's some suicidal thoughts. Is it that connection necessarily taking place? Or is it that he feels bad for the person? Never mentions him by name. The lunatic that he's making reference to is a guy by the name of Legion. Legion is possessed.
Isn't that
No.
Legion is possessed. I think it's the first time in the Bible that it's referenced where Jesus does an exorcism, gets the demons out of him. So like Legion's lines, he's possessed. We are one, we are many. So there's spirits kind of within him, and then Jesus pulls the spirits out, and essentially it's an exorcism. But the person that he seems to like, not disciples, not all these other people, but he identifies with the lunatic, the one who needs help from Jesus because of dealing with all these kind of issues and whatnot with it. Is it, because he identifies with them? Who knows? Is it part of the suicidal thoughts where he mentions like stones and whatnot? We don't know. But it's an interesting choice that that's the character that he identifies with. Page 99, at the beginning of that chapter, which is chapter 14 with 98, he starts talking about this right after he's having a memory with Allie. And this is when Holden and his friend Bobby are going to go play. Allie wants to go play along with him, ride his bike. Holden's like, no, we don't really want you to come. And so he's kind of having this little flashback with Allie where he feels guilty. And then he slides over into this story from the Bible with the lunatic that seems like he's kind of connecting himself or aligning himself with. When he has thoughts of Allie, he tends to kind of start to certainly have to do.
become depressed?
Certainly, a lot of times he does become depressed with it, which I think is going to lead into the question that Sam will let you answer here in a little bit. What does he fear? Sometimes it makes him happy, to kind of think about Allie, but inevitably, usually there's some kind of remembrance of, but he's not here anymore, kind of conversation starts to take place. How can you tell for sure when Holden is feeling vulnerable? And this would be something to kind of keep in mind as you're going through the rest of the chapters, from 17 on. What would be some things that he says or does when you can tell, okay, this doesn't mean that he's, depressed at this moment, but where he is feeling kind of vulnerable, wants to kind of shut off himself from the rest of the world. I'd say there's two main things that will come to mind. One of them considering Allie.
He says I'm depressed.
Not that one.
Jane.
What about Jane?
He feels like whenever whatever his name is, Stradlater,
The roommate.
the roommate.
Yeah, the secret Slav.
Whenever his roommate's like, I'm taking this girl out, Jean, something or other. You can tell that offends him, and it's like sensitive. It's like a sensitive place.
Yeah, and I would say maybe this kind of. I'm going to go a little bit beyond Jane. We're going to still come back to Jane when talking about Allie. What does he do with Allie?
Like with a thought of Allie, or what he used to do?
We would say a thought of Allie. He doesn't necessarily maybe think of it as a thought, and so I don't mean like just remembering him.
I mean, like,
Does he have like conversations with him?
Well, does he talk to Allie?
yes.
Yeah, he talks to Allie. Now, and I'm not criticizing him for it whatsoever, but he will talk to Allie. Now, is Allie there? No. From a literary standpoint, there's a piece of figurative language that we call this. I feel like we mentioned it earlier in the year. Maybe we did not. Anyone know? Speak to someone who is not present. I think we mentioned it when we were looking at the shooting an elephant passage. One of the answers dealt with this. Begins with an A. So if you are speaking to an absent person, and this could also kind of include deity, so it'd be person, being, the term is apostrophe. Sometimes it'll be called, just like the little piece of punctuation, apostrophe or apostrophic speech. But if you're speaking to someone who is not there, apostrophe. You're speaking to me when you're doing your Grapes of Wrath essay. I can't believe you're making me do this, Mr. Kane. Because I'm not standing in your bedroom with you, that would be weird. That would be considered apostrophe. If you're speaking to, a deceased sibling or something, that would be apostrophe. So at times when he is feeling vulnerable, who does he end up kind of having to have a conversation with? More often than not, it is Allie. What would be significant with the fact that that's his go-to person?
That would be the person he feels most safe with, or like.
Okay. Trust the most?
Yeah, you can tell he's still not like completely over the fact that now he's dead. So he's
And I don't think anyone would expect him to be, so this isn't turning into, gee, well, you should be over this grief last 6 months, it's time to move on kind of thing. We're not going anywhere near that. But if that's the person who he trusts the most, or that's the person that he cares about the most, what does that say about the people that surround him? I won't go quite that far.
then he doesn't like us.
He doesn't really have a deep connection.
He doesn't really have, and part of it could be that they don't mean as much to him, and you could say which is first, because he doesn't have a deep connection, they don't mean as much, or because they don't mean as much, he doesn't have a deep connection. But there's certainly not that safety blanket, safety net to kind of keep you from falling further and further and further and further, into an unraveling depression that's kind of starting to take place. The people that he seems to identify with the most and like the most, Allie, you said, Jane, and we could probably throw in a third person, Phoebe. None of those three has he had any contact with, right now at this point. Good news is Phoebe shows up pretty soon, so you get to see Phoebe. But the people that he really identifies with at this point are people that he thinks about, not people that he ends up talking to. And that certainly can be problematic, where you have something you want to spill out to a person, but there's not a person here, there's not a receiver for that kind of information. Well, then, yeah, you're going to be keeping a lot of stuff in all the time.
Do you think that he feels so close to Allie because he's dead? Like Allie hasn't had the chance to annoy him, or do you feel that he genuinely just always had a connection with them?
So, has the connection gotten stronger since Allie's death?
Yeah.
I'm sure him and Allie were always tight. They're 2-year difference. Siblings growing up. You would think those would be the one that you're most likely to play with and whatnot, because Phoebe's older and whatnot. Certainly, Allie would annoy him from time to time. That's what siblings do, whether you're 8, 18, 38. But he certainly remembers Allie more as the person that loved, adored. You'd love him if you got to meet him. 50 times more intelligent than me. Wrote all these poems on his mitt, all that kind of stuff. So he is, again, I don't want this to sound negative, glorifying him, putting him kind of on a pedestal. Maybe more so than he would have if he were still alive. But I certainly would say it seems that the connection would have been close beforehand. If the connection wasn't as close, why would you punch out garage windows? Not to say they never had spat or would annoy each other, but I think more often than not that would have been a pretty tight, close relationship.
If he's always talking to Allie and he's like feeling vulnerable, isn't he just talking to himself? Like Allie can't respond. He's just saying his own thoughts back to him. So the only opinion he'll be getting on what he's doing is his.
Possibly, yes. I think from you and me looking at it, we would kind of, and it's not that, it's when we say conversation, when I say conversation, he talks to Allie. It's not that the ghost of Allie, shows up and starts talking to him. But yeah, in a way, he's certainly talking to himself. Which I think there's probably 14 people in this room that have done that. But I don't think he would be aware or realize it, that you're really kind of sounding ideas off your own person, your own mind, your own thoughts. But that, hey, I'm still talking to Allie. Physically, and I still want to come back down. Physically, what does he do too when he tends to be vulnerable? yes, but I'm going beyond that. And that's going to continue to still happen. Like, take note of when he makes references to some kind of violent outburst or experiences that he's had.
Did he take a shower after his fight with his roommate? Or a bath or anything?
He cleans up his face.
Okay.
Yeah. If you see a depiction of Holden, and when we did the notes, there was the cigarette in his mouth that we're turning into ducks. So what else was he wearing?
A hat.
He's got his red hunting hat. And what's he do with it? Yeah.
What is the significance of his hunting hat that he bought like for a buck in New York?
Cost him $1.
He likes it.
He likes it.
Yeah.
Stradlater says, look sharp. Probably lying to him. Ackley kid, that was a waste of $1. And the hunting hat would be one of those where you have, like, the bill would kind of go up, you'd have the hat itself, and then it would also have those little ear flaps.
Oh, those.
Why'd you have to say it like that? Oh, those. And then what can you do with the ear flaps? You can tie them all together, like, into a knot. So what can you really do with the hat if you want to? And he does wear it, put it on backwards, half the time. Like, you really close yourself off. You put the hat on, you could lower the bill a little bit, you could tie up the ear flaps, which in New York City in the winter is going to feel pretty good because it's freezing out there. But it also kind of shuts you off a little bit from what's going on in the outside world. He says things like, I didn't care what I looked like, or I didn't care who saw me, so I put the hat on. The hat's not one that you would wear if you want to kind of disappear. It's a bright red hat. Like, there's a beacon like showing on Sam right here wearing the hat. With the poncho would be like your hat, pretty much at this point. It's going to draw attention to yourself, but he uses it to kind of close off from it. When does he purchase the hat?
When he just visits New York.
When he loses his house.
He's on the subway, leaves the fencing equipment on the subway. The whole team is mad at him, so they kind of like leave him behind. So he spends his buck, buys the hat. So there's a sense of vulnerability with the hat when he purchases it because he's already kind of been exiled, which you can't blame the team for doing that. He left all his stuff on the subway. But when he walks back 41 blocks to the apartment, puts the hat on. When he's going to spend some time in Central Park, moving forward here with the book, and he's not feeling top notch, he puts the hat on. So if he's talking to Allie and or he has the hat on, pay attention to his thoughts because this is probably, I don't want to say when he's getting to his low points, but this is when he's getting to his most vulnerable points. So those are kind of some cues, some markers to keep in mind.
What's the significance of the ducks?
I want to get to what Sam was going to say 20 minutes ago when I shut him up, and then we'll come back to ducks. Ducks are on the list. We're talking about Holmes' fears, and you're like, ooh, and I said no.
Yeah, then here we are now. Yeah. I don't know, this might be too simple, but his fear of now that I'm living up to this, I feel like what I'm going to say is wrong.
It's going to be a letdown.
Yeah.
If you put the poncho on, no one will think about what you're saying. They're just going to stare at you.
His fear of he's kind of afraid that Jane did stuff with his roommate, Stradlater.
And if she has, that would mean that Jane, from the way that he thinks of her to now, has changed. And inevitably there's going to be change because people age, you grow up. When he thinks of Jane, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Checkers.
What does she do with her checkers?
Keeps the kings in the back.
Okay. So when he thinks of Jane, he thinks of kings in the back row. He doesn't want to think of Jane and Stradlater in the back seat of Ed Behnke's car. So if a change were to take place, that has now completely corrupted his vision of Jane. as we said, the characters that he's putting up on the pedestal, we have Jane, we have Phoebe, we have Allie. So, yes, change is a big deal for him. Towards the end of the reading, he mentions one of his favorite buildings in New York City. I love going to the museum. Mrs. Kane, former math teacher. Yeah, Mrs. Kane.
I had a last year.
I have read
Last 2 years. 2 years in a row for you. Lucky you. She hates going to the museum.
I'm gonna ask her about it.
Which museum?
Primarily like Carnegie,
Science.
because like Natural History Museum, the dinosaurs.
Because she likes.
Yeah.
Not been there.
Pittsburgh, like dinosaur capital of the East Coast. Where have you been?
Really?
If you go to the museum in January, if you go to the museum in February, if you go to the museum in July, if you go to the museum 2 Januaries later, for the most part, it is the same. She doesn't want to look at the same stuff all the time. Phipps Conservatory,
Oh, I love that. That changes.
the butterflies are different this year. They're still butterflies. They're still flowers.
Do you like the museum?
Yeah, they do. They kind of, and they do the stuff for the decorations.
Do you like the museum?
Yeah, I like going to the museum. She'll like going at Christmas time because they have the trees and all that stuff. But for the most part, it does not change. Holden loves the museum because it does not change. It stays the same. She had an awakening.
Yeah.
Now you'll like the museum more too. So he likes knowing how things are going to be. He doesn't like when all this change and whatnot starts to take place. So we could take, what Sam you've put here, and what's one thing that he does not like? Change. What else? And you can build off it or bring up something new.
Isn't that ironic? Because he gets kicked out of every single school he goes to, like every single.
If you're always getting kicked out, nothing's changing.
I mean, I guess that makes sense.
No, yeah.
You don't meet the same person. He's probably never gonna see like Stradlater again or like Ackley or anything like that, and he just like walks away from them and like leaves in the middle of the night.
That's like a different kind of change.
Well,
It's a pretty big change if you
But as a
have
person,
to meet
You-
new people. every single time.
you mentioned the term. I think it was you that mentioned it. Why has Jane changed? Because she has.
Grown up.
What happens if he keeps getting kicked out of school?
He never grows up.
He never grows up.
He's like Timmy Turner.
He ends up being like me. I've been a junior like the last 15 years. I'm still waiting to become a senior one of these years.
They just haven't given you.
Maybe when I'm 60, I'll be senior citizen and a senior all in the same year, maybe. But if he doesn't like finish school, and it's flawed reasoning, certainly. You can't get kicked out of school forever and ever and ever. You can't be like my uncle who was kicked out of kindergarten for growing a mustache. We think that might be a true story. We're not sure. Uncle Muggs. But if he were to finish school, what's next? Something, whether it be college, whether it be career, and mom and dad's plan would be that, he would go to college, but that would be a sign of, I have to grow up. Part of you, and it might be a subconscious thing, part of you don't want to start the college application process because it's annoying, it's a pain, it's expensive, and it also means, I'm going to grow up.
Maybe Allie's death when he was so young, it gave him like a complex that the change was bad, so he thinks that all change is bad.
Here's my thought on it, and going with what you said, I think is a good point. We mentioned this yesterday. Let's recap. How old's Holden?
17,
Allie
16.
Right now,
16.
16/17. Which number we pick, it doesn't matter. We'll say 16 because that's like when the events are going on. Phoebe is 10. How old's Allie?
Like 14. Right
How
now.
old does Holden think Allie
11.
is?
11.
So in his mind, Allie is 11. What's happening?
The rest of them are growing up
And so Ben,
So he's like pretending he's still 13.
in a way, if he keeps having these, whether it be immature thoughts because of flunking out of school, whether it be immature thoughts because I like the museum because nothing changes there, immature thoughts in the sense of talking to Allie, even if you want to call that immature, but if he keeps having these immature thoughts, he could kind of stay younger. It's like a Peter Pan complex almost. But what is naturally happening? There's a gap. Talking about him and Allie when they were younger, I said they were close siblings because they were only 2 years apart. Now, 2 years apart is
6 years.
yeah, 5 or 6, depending what you're looking at. And 10 years from now, the chances are to him, Allie is still going to be an 11-year-old. He's going to be a 25 or 26-year-old. What's happened to him and DB? As DB has grown up.
Separated.
DB's in Hollywood. You know, he's holding in New York before he goes to wherever it is that he's at. But DB has gone off to New York. What could he be fearful of that he's going to do to Allie? I leave him behind. If I leave him behind, what then happens to Allie?
He fades
He
away.
dies.
In a way, I mean, and we already had a death take place, but you get the sense that why does Holden keep thinking about Allie so much? By him thinking about Allie, it preserves his memory, it keeps him alive. Phoebe, we don't know how much she remembers of Allie. It's not that she was 4 when he would have passed away. She would have been 7, so there would be memories with it. But in a way, Holden feels like he is the protector, you know, kind of Allie. And if he continues to age, as that number gets larger, the chances of him being able to keep his little brother around get less and less and less. What happens to memories as you age? They fade. Now, that's not to say that Allie would completely disappear, but might not be as prominent as it is now as it was a couple years ago. If he were to age, if he were to grow up, if he were to leave Allie behind, what does he become?
DB.
Yeah, you could to an extent, and it's not that DB fits into this category, you know, all the time. But I think there'd be another term that he would kind of start to use. What makes you a phony?
You're fake.
Pretty much. I mean, yeah. It seems to be if you're an adult. And it also seems to be, you know, I don't mean this to sound silly or stupid, if you're flesh and blood. You know, if you're someone that he actually interacts with, because who does he have up on a pedestal? People who can do absolutely no wrong. Back row checker Jane can't do anything wrong. But if I go down and see her downstairs and she's not the same, ooh, there could be something wrong. Allie can't do anything wrong. Phoebe, from what we know about her right now, because she's the nice innocent 10-year-old little sister, roller skate skinny, you'd love her, she's 10 times smarter than I am, can't do any wrong.
Is that why he's so afraid to call people up? Because he's so worried that if he tried calling Jane, right? But her mom.
He thinks about it at least. Yeah.
He thinks about it and
For 20 minutes in the phone booth.
Yeah,
By the way,
never
the
does
phone
it.
booth is where there's a phone and you put money in.
Of course.
I keep saying this all the time because I'll go out of Ben's head.
Yeah, you're right.
Either one of them.
No, so he keeps like not wanting to call him because he's afraid if he calls him different, it's gonna ruin the perfect image of like people that he has in his head.
I think with Jane, yes. Like when he's going to call Sally,
Yeah.
before he actually does, later on, I don't want to call Sally because Sally's mom knows my mom. If Sally's mom answers the phone and she finds out I'm in New York, then she'll tell my mom and all this kind of stuff. So part of it's paranoia where I don't want to get caught with stuff. But not wanting to call Jane, yes, I think that would be an example. I mean, and not even just calling, but when Stradler was shaving in the bathroom, Jane is right down there. I mean, for us, it's like Jane's in cafeteria A. You haven't seen her in 2 years. You should go see her. Yeah, I think I might.
And it just doesn't.
No, I don't want to. It's just not in the mood. I don't feel like it. I get the sense with that she is right there. And if he does go down and see her, maybe they do hit it off and have a great conversation. But what ultimately happens?
She changes.
She's going to leave with Stradler. And then that's going to be, the sour taste that's left in her mouth. So it's not in any way going that, okay, the way Holden is looking at things is terrible, or how, he needs to change his perspective, but I don't think he has it in his mind as to how can I continue to grow without leaving that person behind. When some of you will view this as a sad story, so I apologize in advance. When Sadie turned 6 last year, 5, she got her first.
Sorry,
No. Addie's hoping that that's going to happen when she turns like 11. She will be sadly disappointed. This is a big moment in childhood. She got her first bike. Like her bike. You know, as opposed to here's your sister's princess bike with like the crummy training wheels that use a whole phrase and all that kind of stuff that's been beat up. Like you get your bike. So there's a little bit of freedom. Don't go onto the street without mom or dad outside.
Oh, never mind.
Okay. Our driveway goes like straight down, so she can't even like drive on the driveway by herself because it'll just barrel down. But she was excited because okay, she has a bike. That means something. She said, "Now we all have bikes. Allie has a bike. I have a bike, and Emery's 8, so he has a bike too. Emery's her brother, who she never met because he was born in between Addie and Sadie, and died the day that he was born. So he did not live beyond, a few hours. When she thinks about her, and she says older brother, she thinks of her brother as being 8 years old, 9 years old. She'll be thinking of him as being 10 years old, coming up later this year. So as she progresses, as she gets older, and it might be because she's younger, she still thinks of him as getting bigger. When I think about him, I tend to think of holding in my hand, very small. I don't usually think about 10 years old, 11 years old. I certainly know dates, but you kind of think of it more as like an anniversary than as like a birthday and all those kinds of things happening. But her viewpoint as a child, probably I think would be part of the difference, and maybe because she's younger, would be that he continues to grow. Or you take a look at Holden's viewpoint, as opposed to that progression, he looks at it as this is a finite moment, in time, in history, and as I grow, I'm just going to continue getting further and further and further and further away. Not that you're going, always kind of like with that little 2-year gap in between. It's not that there's a right way, it's not that there's a wrong way to look at it. What becomes tragic for Holden, though, is that if as he continues to grow, what's he going to do to himself as he gets further and further and further away from Allie? And I don't mean like, suicide or anything like that, but he's probably going to hold himself accountable for it. And is there anything he can do about it? No. And now think about Salinger. What's happening to Salinger in like his early, mid-20s? Pardon? He's in a war. He's seen victims of the Holocaust. And it's not that necessarily that he's going to feel that himself, may be accountable for it. But after you go through all this kind of stuff, and we mentioned this as you come back home, he's probably dealing with like PTSD, which those things aren't going diagnosed as frequently, back then as they would be today. 1949, 1950, you have the generations of people who survived World War I, survived the Great Depression, survived World War II. What do you do with those emotions? What do you do with those feelings of guilt or accountability? For the most part, you keep them in because it's not going to be manly enough to talk about them. Or, well, you've dealt with that stuff. Look at all the stuff the Swayzes have dealt with. Look at everything that's gone on in the Emmons family. Look at what the Johnstons, both of them, have had to deal with. Because whoever you talk to has kind of dealt with some kind of grief. So where Holden's like the first teenager character, this would be one of those first characters that would be dealing with grief, that would be dealing with some kind of personal issues, and it's in that perfect storm of a society where you're not expected to really share them. And so we said yesterday, do you find it relatable? And a lot of you were going, yes, and Maria's hand was going up with relatable. I think part of that relatability is he's dealing with issues that he doesn't know how to handle, and he certainly doesn't know who to talk to about. And I think that's where that universal character of him kind of comes from. That not that everyone's going to be dealing with the death of a sibling the way that he is, or flunking out of school the way he is, but I think a lot of times you feel unsure of what you're supposed to do and who you communicate with. The ducks, that's what we come back to, we don't have a whole lot of time. What's his concern with the ducks?
Where do they go?
Where do they go? They're frozen in place just like the fish, who take all the nutrients through their pores. Not really. What do the ducks do?
Go south
They go south. Why do ducks leave?
to get away from the winter.
Because it's frozen, they have nowhere to go.
They don't have, their home is uninhabitable. Holden's talking to a cab driver. He keeps asking cabbies, where do the ducks go? He doesn't have a home. His fantasy, he keeps flunking out, you know, is uninhabitable for him. It's almost like you're kind of asking, like, where do I go? He's the ugly duckling. So he's really a swan. He'll
No.
come out of his shell. We'll see.
Little edgy TV.
They're finishing for Tuesday next week.
Huh?
Whoa.
That's it.